I'm Tegan from the Mining Mum podcast. Are you thinking about a career change in 2025? Sign up to our database at talentminingandminerals.com. And if you're a company seeking new talent in your business, reach out to us. Welcome back to the Mining Mum podcast. I'm Tegan, your host, and this is the podcast where we chat to mining professionals and people in the resource sectors about their tips, tricks, and insights into the industry. We chat about their experience and their career. So today I have an exciting guest, John. Hey, John.
Hey, how are you, Teeks? Good to see you again.
John, you too. John is a Central Manager for a rail logistics company in New South Wales. And I previously met John many years ago in the mining industry where he was a superintendent. And he's had over 20 years experience in mining and rail and just a vast career, haven't you?
Yeah, it's been really good, actually. I've really enjoyed my career.
So good. So tell us a bit more about, how you first broke into the industry and give us an overview of your career so far.
Sure. I was really lucky enough. I fell into the mining industry. My first role was up in Gove in Northern Territory, or Nhulunbuy. A friend knew a friend and they were looking for some leaderships in a supervisor's role. So I went up there as a supervisor, never been in mining before. Which was, as a first role in mining was just firstly, a great place to go. And the mine itself, was really good. At that time, it was run by Alcan, a Canadian company. Then Rio Tinto took it over when I was up there. So I was the materials handling supervisor when I went up there, and we looked after the bauxite as it was dropped into the crushing in the pit. There was 25 kilometres of overland conveyor, then it went into like stockpiles, and then we exported that. And there was a process there that turned that bauxite into alumina. So we exported both alumina and bauxite. So really good team. And that's where I met Mark, a guy called Mark Bevan. Mark was the superintendent there when he left to go to Port Hedland, BHP. I took over that superintendent role. And was up there for about 5 years. And then, unfortunately, my mum had cancer and she was in Sydney. So it was, a long way to go and be away from family. And when she passed away, we sort of decided that we've been away for family for, too long. So we ended up getting a project manager's role in Townsville. So I was in Townsville a couple of years. And then out of the blue, I got a phone call from Mark. He was in Port Hedland, and they were just starting the big expansion there around, I think it was around 2013, and asked me to come over and help operations, run the shutdowns, and from an operational point of view, which to this day is still the best job I ever had. And it was basically this massive Gantt chart on the wall with 2 years worth of construction and work, and basically it was just my job to sort of work out the maintenance plans to make sure that we maximise the production going through the port at that time. And, it was, as I said, it was the best job I've ever had. It was an unbelievable job. And unfortunately, I had a marriage breakup. My partner wanted to move back to Sydney, so I was lucky enough to get a fly-in, fly-out job, doing like project work. And then just around that, being away doing the FIFO, as anyone who's done FIFO knows, it's a hard gig, especially when you're sort of separated, from your family and trying to work out times for your kids. And then really fortunate enough to get a job here in Sydney started off as a rail superintendent. And then I took over as the rail manager. Well, they moved that role into a bigger role. We're a company called Pacific National, a great company to work for. Same deal, really good people, both leadership and the people under me, leadership team, really good people. And that's what I'm doing right now.
That's exciting. And so coming from mining to now logistics, what are you guys moving? Not dirt anymore?
No, not dirt. Unfortunately, not dirt. But we move lots of things so I basically look after the Sydney region west, out to country, New South Wales. So we move a lot of our stuff. They call it industrial, so it's aggregate. We move cement and we move rubbish out of Sydney. So for a company called Veolia, we move sugar, we move cotton, we move logs. We do a lot of stuff around the port. So I've got a train shuttle services that runs 2 to 3 shuttles a day, depending on the take, and they just run to the ports and back. And all that product's distributed out onto trucks and moved around Sydney, for Bunnings, Kmart, Woolworths, all that sort of stuff. So we move about 26 trains a day. That's both in and out of the depot that I manage, 130 train drivers, 10 supervisors. We got train control managers. So look, and to come to somewhere like Port Hedland, where it was so busy and you have to be on the ball, I think that's sort of the takeaway moving into this role. And, I think we're extremely lucky in the mining industry around safety and how important safety was. And, in the rail industry, especially around Sydney, we probably wasn't as safe as what it could be. So a lot of stuff like visual management boards, making sure people do take throughs was sort of introduced when I first started. So having that background really helped, embed those policies to make sure that we're a safer business. And and that's been really good since my time here. So that'd probably be the biggest takeaways.
Yeah, and being able to transition from, the mining industry into that industry and the synergies as well, which is really good. But another thing that you've come here to talk to us about is a book that you've recently written and published. So Tarzan Loves Jane, about your own personal story. How did that all come about?
Yep. So the book itself, in 2017, I found out about, I suppose, the person who assaulted me. I found out that he'd been moved around from school to school when they found out that what he was doing to the boys, and then they're all boys' schools. So, at sort of that, when I found that out, I wanted to, bring that to the public's light and to people who went to that school, because he was at my school for over 30 years and doing the same class. And so, he was doing the same thing for 30 years. So I did a newspaper article in 2017 about it. And that article sort of blew up. It was supposed to be just in the Daily or the Sunday Telegraph in Sydney, but it blew up Australia-wide. And probably accidentally, I found myself as a bit of a poster boy for a sexual assault, especially in the Catholic Church. There was a lot of stuff going on at that time. Cardinal George Pell, was being prosecuted. There was inquiries about everything. Mentally and emotionally, I wasn't ready for that. And I found it quite challenging with my own mental health trying to deal with that, because, from the time of 11 to when that happened, when I was 51, I'd never told a single soul. So then all of a sudden, I went from no one even knowing what happened to me, then all of a sudden everybody knowing what had happened to me. So I had to deal with that. And, and that was really hard. Yeah. So, and I found myself sort of probably falling backwards. I mean, I was struggling anyway. And, I went through some pretty dark times around that period. And I found myself, I thought I was getting a little bit better, starting to see the light. But I found that I was falling back into probably a darker place than I originally was. So I found I read an article, and I found a psychiatrist who does a form of therapy, and where they get you to visualize what happened to you, but change the end result. It's called narrative therapy. So instead of being assaulted, I'd write a story about my brother's coming in and saving him. I must have killed him like 300 times through different ways. And then like it was just every night I had to write a different story. And what happens is your brain doesn't know the difference between reality and what you're continually telling it. And so over that period of time, I was having like 3 nightmares a week, and over a period of time, I found myself that I stopped having nightmares. And then I got to the point where instead of just killing him every single time, the story I submitted to her was he died naturally the year before I went there. So he wasn't even at my school at the time. And that was a bit of a breakthrough moment, because, the triggers of even having to think about going to school with him there and all that was taken away.
Yeah.
So, writing those stories, and at the end of it, when I was getting better and, I felt that I was good enough to sort of back off the time that I was seeing her, and she agreed. And she actually said to me, I do this with a lot of people, and I really enjoy the stories that you write. Like, you've got a real knack in the way that you write, and which I enjoy. You should look at doing a writing course. And my partner, I used to read the stories to her. And that day when I came home, she had printed out an ad that she's seen from a local writing school, said, look, there's a course that starts next week. You should ring and see if you can get on it. And I did. And that, I went and started doing that, and I really enjoyed that process. And then, just one day I said to her, I'm going to write a book about what happened to me, but I want to turn it into something else. Like, I don't want it to be a sad story. I want it to be, more of a, dark romantic comedy. So I want it to be a story of, love and happy ending and make it funny. But, it starts off with the sad story, but, that's a journey from someone. And it's basically a journey going through that mental health process. It's one thing for me, for example, just coming out to say, I've got mental health problems. And I thought that would be the cure for me. I've called it out. I'm telling people that I do have problems, but I didn't think then I'd have to go and do the work. I thought, right, I told someone I've got a mental health problem. Now I'm going to be cured. And that's just not the case. You've got to put in the work, and you've got to want to be better and stick with it. And then, once I did that, things started to work for me. And then, then that landed into the book, and I just happened to, again, my partner knew someone who wrote a book, and she read it, or read parts of it, and she liked it and put me onto an editor, and she helped me and she liked it, and we just, evolved from there. And it's, and when I look at it now, it's just amazing that, something that I thought 3 years ago is now, selling on Amazon. If people are reading the story and then giving me, it's it's amazing.
It's so good. And it's amazing that you've confronted what's happened with you and come through it and sharing your experiences with others. One thing I wanted to ask was, what made you originally want to share your story, on in the newsletter, like in the newspaper, sorry, when you initially, was that part of your mental health journey as well, or how did that come about when you first,
Yeah, I did a story for November around mental health after my mum died in Port Hedland. And I met a reporter called Beck Parrish. She was like the local reporter. And then we were talking about different things. And she asked me, she said, did something else happen to you? And I'd only just seen a doctor. It wasn't long after I'd come out of this myself and actually voiced it. And then I told her about it, and we were talking about it. And she left to go to Sydney. And she's the one, and she rang me and said that she found a story and sent me the story. And just when I read that they were just moving him around, I just can't describe the anger that I felt. And I thought, well, if that happened to me, how many other people did that happen to in school? And how do you get that story out? And then we were just talking, and she said, look, how do you feel about actually doing a story about it? In the Sydney papers, it'll come out and people in Sydney will see it. And I hadn't even told my father. I've told my siblings, my mum passed by then. And when I was actually flying home and to do the story the next day, I had to ring my dad from the airport and say, look, I'm doing this story. This is going to be in the Sunday's paper. So,
not knowing and then coming out like that.
They're a bit shocked, to be honest. And you can imagine it's such a personal story,
Yeah.
And I'm, as I said before, I'd only just finished telling them, I hadn't told anyone. So I told my family, I told my dad, and next 2 days' time, I was about to tell the world. It was a scary moment, to be honest, but I don't know. I just had this voice in my head saying that, if you didn't know this, who else doesn't know? And but when the story came out, it was the most read story online that day. It was also in Australia, it was the most read story for men aged between 50 and 60. And those men who read it more than 3 times, so that people went back to it to read it again. And the other thing I found out is once that article came out, over 100 boys, or well, they're men now, but over another 100 boys from that school came forward. So for me, that's what I got from it. Yes, I put myself out there and put myself out there mentally and emotionally, and I did pay for it. But when I think about why I did that, and I didn't think about that at the time I was doing it, but now, it's just like, wow, what I did helped, so many other people come forward. And it wasn't just that either, Tegan. What I found was even when I went back to Port Hedland, I had men that I knew really well come to me and tell me stories of things that had happened to them when they were boys, and they'd never told anyone, just pulled me aside and, so just that in itself was reward enough for me, and I'll always be glad that I did it. But it took my family, a bit, some more than quicker than others, but it's just because they had to deal with it themselves too. And all my brothers went to that school as well.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of stuff, that they had to deal with as well when they found out what happened to me there. So, it was a big time for the family for sure.
Yeah. And did you guys ever get justice with the perpetrator?
Well, he died.
He died. Okay.
And he died. So, and part of that newspaper article was, I was raped when I was 11. I joined the military. I joined. And I went back at 18 to kill him. And and when I went there, they told me that he died 18 months earlier. But when the story came out all that time later, like that 30 years later, he hadn't died. He was there. The teacher just recognized knew what I was there for. Well, obviously to confront, probably didn't know I was going to kill him. But so, and again, fate would have it, I didn't kill him, and so I didn't go to jail and I had to do all that. But that was part of that newspaper article. That's what I went there to do. So,
wow, that's so crazy. I'm going to buy the book so that I can read it. I love what did you call it? A comedy?
Dark romantic comedy.
Dark romantic comedy. I love it. That's definitely up my alley.
Remember, saying to my partner, I said, because you have to put it in what category it is, and I said, well, I just say it's a comedy, and like, it's not a comedy. Let's put some dark things in there. She said it's funny, there's funny bits, but you can't call it a comedy.
Yeah. And what about the name? What inspired you with the name?
Yeah, the name was quite funny. I went to a part of that narrative therapy. My doctor asked me if I'd go into like a group session. She thought that I'd get a lot out of that. And she found that, men in groups, trying to get people to talk more. And one of his stories, he was talking about being Tarzan. He felt that sometimes he gets into this dark place, and then, he wanted to have some strength like Tarzan, be able to just be the king of that jungle and not be afraid of anything. And then at the end of it, he said, so I'll be Tarzan and all I have to do is find my Jane. And it just really stuck with me. I'm thinking, and I don't know if someone said it or it was something in my, Tarzan needs a Jane. And then it just went, Tarzan needs a Jane, Tarzan loves Jane. But I always remember that Tarzan story. And then when I was writing that book, I actually wanted to call it a couple of other things. And my editor's going, you can't call it that, and you can't call it that. And then part of the Tarzan Loves Jane in the book is actually a dating website. And and the editor said to me, well, why don't you use that Tarzan Loves Jane as the name of the book, because it plays a pretty big part in the book. And so we decided to go with that. And then the saying underneath for the dating website is everyone deserves love. And then, I live in Coogee Beach and there's a walk there, and we're just on a walk one morning, and with myself and Amber, and we were sort of talking about, well, we need a catch line for this dating website, and we'll just walk along. It was like, what about everyone deserves love? And we're like, yeah, let's use that. So that's how we ended up with Tarzan Loves Jane.
It's nice.
Perfect. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, so nice.
It's a good spot. We're very lucky.
Yeah. Well, finally, before we wrap up today, do you have one piece of advice for anybody thinking about getting into the mining industry? That's the one part. And then the second part is, and then the second piece of advice, anyone that might be facing, a similar experience to you and how to navigate that.
Yeah. People wanting to get into them. Yeah. So people who want to get in the mining industry, absolutely, I recommend getting into the mining industry. I see a lot of things on social media about, fly in, fly out and how easy it is, and it's all about the money. Fly in, fly out is definitely not easy. You work hard, you do long hours, you do long days. I mean, I was on an 8 and 6, which was a great roster, but, I see people now doing 2 and 1 and 3 and 1, which is, you're away for a long periods of time. You miss your families. It'll set you up financially, but there's things in the background that you've got to negotiate. I'd actually recommend going and spending time residential. I was really fortunate to be residential when I was in Gove and at Port Hedland, and I loved being residential, being going home every night and just being part of those communities. And mining towns are absolutely great communities. Everyone looks after each other. When my children were in the school, there was only one class per year through primary school. And when they moved back to Sydney, there's like 5 per year. So, I think they got a better education being from a small town. And they're more social kids because they had to be, there was judo, there was swimming, there was all these things that you do in small communities. So my advice for anyone thinking about the mining industry is definitely do that. If you can do residential, try and get residential. And for people who are suffering mental health or have been through something in their childhood or something they haven't dealt with, my advice to them would be, if they're listening to this, when this finishes, they should go and tell someone who loves them what's going on with them straight away. And get help. You need to get help straight away. I held on what happened to me for 40 years. And I just think, I had opportunities to speak about it. But, I suppose I'm from that generation where, you didn't speak up. You just tried to get through it. But I found when I did speak up, the very first time I told someone what happened to me, the outpouring of emotion that I had was it was just 40 years of, outpouring of emotion. But then the second time it wasn't as bad. And then the third and the fifth. And now we're talking about it right now. And, it makes me feel a bit sad, but, I'm totally okay with that. And I've got things that I can do. But, I just sort of feel like, and you can never look back on your life, but, if I could have had someone with it, I suppose that I could trust with. And I did. I had family. As I said, Shane McDonald was a great friend to me up there and helped me through some horrible times. I could have had that conversation with him. But you've got to talk to someone. You've got to find a mental health professional. And my advice on that is mental health professionals are like finding a new partner. The first one mightn't be the right one for you. So if it doesn't feel right, you need to shop around and get someone who gets you. And, I was pretty fortunate enough. I had 2 really good mental health professionals that changed my life and made my life better. So that's my advice.
Thank you so much. That was so insightful and inspiring, John. And it's so good to see you again. So
It's good to
thank
see
you
you
so
too,
much for
Tegan.
joining me today.
No, thanks for having me.
Where does everybody find your book? So Amazon, and do you have
Yep.
a website?
Yep. It's on Amazon. So the big problem with Amazon, though, you've got to go into Amazon, click on books, and then type in the name of the book, Tarzan Loves Jane, and just JJ Comerford is what I've put the book down as. And I'm on Insta. I'm on all the social media stuff. So if you're having troubles finding it, just reach out and let me know, and I'll send through. There's a code on one of those. I think it's Insta that people can just screen, and that'll take you to the book.
Perfect. And I'll also put it in the show notes. So, yes, thank you
Thank you.
so much for joining me today.
All good. Thanks, Teek. See you later.